This is First Encounter, a podcast exploring both the foundations and the future of historical romance. Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Encounter. I am Andie James, a historical romance enthusiast and author. And I'm very excited for today's episode because we have a very special guest. My guest today is Jen Prokop, who many of you know as half of the dynamic duo behind Fated Mates. And
So
she's
funny.
just, I don't know, you've been,
Well,
I don't
I've
know.
been, romance for a long time, Andie.
Yeah, romance for a long time because I know you've, well, I don't know if, I guess
Well,
reviewed for a long, long time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've been reviewing for a decade for sure.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to
Yeah.
kind of think back on that. And then I started reviewing for the Book Queen, who's still on like Blue Sky and maybe Threads. And then I've been reading long enough that this book probably I read when it was like new.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No.
So
Jen's been reading romance forever. If you listen to Fated Mates, you know that. Famously found, grandma's stock of
the bag of books, man.
the bag of books. So,
whatever comes
Yeah.
after podcasts will be a bunch of young people being like, yeah, I found them in the little free library.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, totally. Totally. And I personally am part of a group that I know I'm not alone in where it was really COVID for me because I just needed a happy escape and I started reading romance and then I never turned back.
So you didn't read romance at all before COVID?
I did.
Yeah,
did.
okay.
But it wasn't like what I actively read. Like,
Sure.
I mean,
it was just like part of your reading diet.
Yeah. It was like the occasional, I was much more a historical fiction, lit fic, occasional mystery type person. And there'd be times where I was like, oh, I really want a romance. And I
Right.
did read a few here and there in high school, and they were very much kind of these old school historicals that I found in like a secondhand bookshop.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was fun reading this, which I haven't even said today. I introduced this before, but everyone, what we're discussing today is The Bride by Julie Garwood, which is a classic that I had never read. So we rectified that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What year did this come out? I meant to look it up. Did you look it up?
I looked it up and it said 1989.
Yeah,
Does that
I
sound
would say
right to you?
that sounds about right. I would have said like late,
For some
like
reason-
89, 91,
Yeah.
kind of in that era. Yeah.
For some reason in my head, I had Julie Garwood because, she is kind of a mother of the genre. She's and
one of the four J's. If you
the J's. I've heard you talk about that, and so I guess in my head, I was thinking this was going to be like 70s, and so I was thinking it was older than that. I guess I was thinking more like Judith McNaught.
Well, so it's interesting. So like everybody, the four J's were Judith McNaught, Julie Garwood, Jude Deveraux, and Joanna Lindsay. And these were like four historical romance authors who basically were most of them writing, I would say like in the 80s to 90s.
Okay.
Kind of the Fabio years.
Yes.
In some ways for some of those authors more than others. And, this was a time of like, there was like category romance, right?
Yes.
And then there were like the big standalone books were historical.
Yeah. Right.
And these would have been, paperbacks you bought at the grocery store and, check, like that, like the mass market paperback size. And, and I would say like my take on this is that if you were reading back then and you were reading historical, you would probably have favorites among those. And like for me, I definitely read all of those authors, but I was definitely a Julie Garwood girl. And I really also love Jude Deveraux. But it's funny.
Jude Deveraux is also Judith Ivory. Is that correct?
No, Judith Ivory is different.
Judy Cuevas and Judith Ivory. Okay,
right. Who was also a J, but didn't produce as much. I think Judith Ivory has a handful of books. Julie Garwood and Judith McNaught for sure, Joanna Lindsay were just like producing at a pretty, probably a book a year or, at least or whatever, which would have been really fast at the time.
Right.
So, but it's funny because I don't reread a lot of the Jude Deveraux books. I reread still some Garwoods, like are really hardwired into me. Yeah.
Well, that makes sense because when I first started the podcast. So, like 6 months ago. We're still very new. But I reached out to Jen as one of the people saying, hey, would you be willing to, do an episode with me? And I was like, you can discuss whatever you want.
No pressure.
Whatever you want. Like, I just would love to have you on because I guess I don't know if I need to disclaimer this or not, but I have worked with Jen before as an editor. She helped me do some developmental editing on my first series. So that's how I got to know her, other than, of course, listening to her like weekly. So I know her whether or not she knows me. But yeah. But so I reached out to Jen because I knew I wanted to have you be one of my guests if you were able. And you were like, well, who are you thinking? And I gave her a list and she was like, ooh, Julie Garwood.
Yeah, like, let's do it. Right.
But yeah, no, I loved it. I think this was my first Garwood. But
yeah, sure. Know. I mean, that's the other thing. You're like, have I read this author before?
Yeah,
who knows, right? Yeah.
The overwhelming feeling I got when reading this book, I guess I would say, first of all, I loved it. Yeah.
I would worry. I mean, I would listen. I would worry about you if you didn't.
If I
right?
didn't. Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely things about it we'll talk about that are different, right? I mean, like, kind of structurally, like narratively, whatever. But like, it's a banger. Yeah.
It's great. But it's funny because I throw back to the very intro episode, if anyone listened to that, and maybe you can help me with this, Jen. But I was saying, kind of how I did occasionally read a book like this back in high school. And there's one that has stuck with me, but I couldn't tell you the title. I couldn't tell you who wrote it. I couldn't tell you the main plot.
Every romance reader has their white whale for sure, right?
But there's this one scene that has stuck with me. And it was basically like, the reason I'm bringing it up now is because as I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, maybe that book was a Garwood. I don't know. But like, it was similar. I'm sure it was similar in terms of like setting, time period. Maybe not time period, but it was very much kind of like the Scottish guy had taken the woman and brought him back and whatever, right? And I don't think it was like a kidnapping situation, but it wasn't like a she wanted to marry him kind of situation. But he had basically like sequestered her once they reached his clan because he couldn't sleep with her until she bled. I mean, hello, we have to make sure, right? That she's not bearing a child, or if she is, it's his, right? But I remember this, he like came to visit her in her room as she's like shut away, right? Nothing problematic there. But he was like sharing a meal with her and he had her like sit on his lap and he was like feeding her and stuff. And then it was dessert and there was like these little candies and he's like, which one's your favorite? And she was like, lemon. And he was like, oh, let's figure out which one's lemon, which obviously he knew. But he like put him in his mouth and then he kissed her so they could like share it and taste it together until they finally got to lemon. And that just like stuck with me.
Like stuck with you. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to tell you, I don't think that's Garwood.
Probably
only
not.
Because like the first part of it, I feel like given, I mean, it could be anybody, right? Like the thing is like that kind of thing could be anybody. But I would say like, I feel like that's got like a little more Joanna Lindsay in it.
Maybe.
But
the reason I bring that up, right? There's a reason for my crazy is as I was reading this, like, even though I've not read a ton of books from this era or that are set kind of in that medieval Scotland, like I've read some, but not a lot. Like it's not the main thing I read, but there was something that felt so familiar about this, right? That like that book could have fit into this. And so it was kind of like, you can school me on this, but I don't know if this is something that Garwood helped create kind of this world or she was just writing into it. But it strikes me the way that we kind of write Regencies now a little bit, where it's kind of like just these standard conventions that this world.
Yeah, I mean, I think like that's the thing about, I mean, this is why like, listen, like you've read every iteration of it and then you get back to like the OG one and you're like, oh, this is where it comes from, right? And so, I mean, I don't know if I would, I mean, now I would say like the thing about these old Scotland, Highland or historicals, like there are plenty of people writing them.
Yes.
I think like one of the things I would say is like, for me, Garwood is outside, especially when you like on the reread of what I would consider like the bodice ripper, right? Like, you're not getting a lot of sense that like Alec is he's not forcing her, right? Like, so I think the other thing about like sort of what's happening here is you're seeing like the evolution of like kind of like when you read it, you're like, oh yeah, I see how it's like old school, but also like the seeds of what has become kind of contemporary like romance mores, right? The way that like the characters sort of interact with each other, like, the power of, the importance of like love as being the thing that's going to determine the HEA, like when they can say that to each other, right? Like things like that.
Right.
I think it's also like, so some of that exists. I think the way that it's old school is, like sort of the reliance on like an outside external plot, right? To sort of drive like a final crisis, right? Like you're like, what's keeping the tension up in this book in terms of, right? They're super into each other from the beginning. And yet we keep reading.
Right.
So I think like there's ways in which like, that doesn't surprise me at all that you would read this and feel like, oh, this is familiar to me.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know, I think Garwood was like one of many people writing like sort of the Scottish Highlander. I think like the real thing that Garwood brings to the table though is humor. This is like a funny fucking book.
It is.
And I think like that's the part, like it's truly like their banter, like sort of like, like the way, like the like running gag about how she's always in the, like, can't find her way out of a paper bag. You know what I mean? Like how bad she is with
terrible
directions.
sense of direction always.
Right. And, the thing about how she has a man's name, that like she's kind of convinced everybody's putting her, her up, he's putting everybody up to like sort of joking with her about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think like that's the other thing though, is like for me, like this is like an example of like a really joyful, really fun book to read. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the other big differences though, well, I mean, so like plot wise, if people haven't read it.
Yeah. We should
right.
recap
I mean, I don't know, like kind of your typical structure.
Spoilers ahead if you haven't read it. I mean,
I think
without
this
saying,
is,
but
it's funny. I think like this is a book that's very hard to discuss without like spoilers intent because like to me it has like this has some really great super memorable scenes, right? Like you were talking at the beginning about like the candy, right? Like I think one of the things about like whether or not a book like kind of lives on is like how memorable we can make it, and I think like that's why like there's so many things in this book that I think of as being like really super memorable outside of like the plot, which as you said is like pretty basic, right? Like Jamie's father is sort of this like deadbeat. He hasn't paid his taxes.
Yeah.
And so to punish him, right, the king is like, you got to marry off one of your daughters, and he's also punishing the Highlanders. You got to marry some of these English ladies. I'm going to like tie all you people together. And in comes Alec Kincaid, like riding his horse, a giant of a man, right? And she is the most beautiful of these four, daughters, but also the thing is, the way in which she's like a very old school heroine is even though she's very close to her sister, she's also this like loner, right? She's like really
very different from her sister.
Not like other girls kind of vibe, right? Like she works harder, she's prettier, she knows how, how to do all these things. She's stubborn, she doesn't have any fear, right? Like all of that stuff.
Yeah. The healer.
Yes. Right. Exactly. And then I think like the part that's actually really funny to me is she has befriended like the stable master, this old Scottish man
I was
named,
going to talk about him. Beak.
named Beak, who has taught her Gaelic. And she does not tell anybody this, right? She doesn't tell Alec this. And so like another really funny, like kind of running gag is that she can understand everything they're talking about all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And, off they go to Scotland, right? Where, her job is just going to be to like be his wife. But what she does instead, of course, is disrupt his entire clan.
Of course. Yeah.
It's great.
It's wonderful.
So when you were reading this, how did you feel in terms of like what was that like for you? I've read it so many times.
I know.
It's just like taking a bath for me.
Well, I had, we'll talk about it, but there were a couple moments where I'm like, yep, this was written in 89.
Oh yeah, sure.
But it was fine. Like there was nothing that was like, there was eyebrow raises. There was nothing like truly offensive.
Yeah.
I will say that.
That's not true, by the way, of all of Garwood's books, right? Like there are some that, there's like one in particular where it's like really like demonizing a gay character, or I can't exactly remember, or like, you know what I mean, in a way that is like really offensive, and so I think like this book does, I think, along with some of the other ones, like really, thread the needle without it being,
I enjoyed, I think the setup for this was very much kind of the culture clash between them, right? How are these two gonna kind of find common ground, reconcile, come to understand each other. But it's funny because you mentioned, how he's like the big, huge
Sure.
man riding on his horse and she's the most beautiful. And because one thing that I found that made me really appreciate just her writing prowess, right? Garwood's skill as a writer is, there are some really stereotypical characters in here, right? Like you have just total archetypes.
Yes.
In Jamie and Alec, and also some of the side characters, like her sister Mary is just kind of the weepy, English woman who can't handle anything. And, so, she very much leans into the stereotypes, but I never found it too much. I was never like going, oh, yeah, this is corny because it's so like,
right.
She made it work, even though, of course, she's the most beautiful woman. And of course, he's like this giant man who is known as the Kincaid because he's such a fierce warrior. And,
Sure.
It's all there, right? Everything that you would expect, but it doesn't ever fall into anything. Like, it's still a serious book, and I was taking it seriously. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It took me a minute. You said we'll talk structural stuff, but it took me a minute. I obviously have read books where they had head hop before. But this one was a lot from the very beginning. And it just took me a moment to get into it. But I did, it was fine.
Yeah. So everybody, like, what that means is, like,
Yes.
we're really we're really used right now to, like, really, like, strong delineations when point of view switches.
Yes.
Right? If it's not chapter by chapter, if it's like kind of mid chapter, usually we'll get like sort of a set of, like some sort of like some asterisks or whatever on the page, right? To like sort of indicate.
It is a scene break for me.
There is,
right.
It's like a scene break. And in this book, it is completely fluid,
Very fluid.
I mean, you could have not even just like paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence.
Yeah.
And even to the point where occasionally there's a drift into like the point of view of like a side character, right?
Yes. I was going to say that was the thing is it's not so much if it was just Alec and Jamie, like that, like I get it. Like we've softened what we do today, right? But like it goes in like it, I think chapter 1 starts from her father's point of view, Baron Jameson. And then later in that chapter, after we've, the sisters are freaking out because one of them's going to have to marry Scott, she goes to the stable and we talked about this stable master, right? And it goes into Beak's head and then it goes into her sister's head sometimes. And so it took me a second because it was so frequent and fluid, like you said, but it didn't bother me it didn't bother me. Like I did have to adjust, but within like a couple pages, I was like, okay. And
it's interesting. I mean, I think like in terms of like what it achieves, right, is like there's no, so like one of the things Sarah says all the time on the podcast, and something I often say now to like authors when I'm editing is like if a scene isn't working, try switching the point of view, right, to the other character, but also that you should like intuitively like sort of be steering towards like who's the character that has the most to lose in any given scene, right? So because you're really showing like the person who's carrying the most in the scene, right? Like saying they have the most to lose, the most to worry about, whatever. And I think like what head hopping, right? Which again, we like say it's bad, and I get that it's out of fashion, but like when you read this book, what it allows you to do is actually like sort of have moments where you're like, okay, at this moment they both have something to lose or gain, or or there is a secondary character who has an observation that cannot be made by one of the two characters about what is happening between them. And so it just allows you to really like and I would also say like the other difference that I think that this has is the point of view overall is not as close.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's why, because you're going to at a moment's notice be able to sort of drift out of it into someone else's point of view. So I think that also takes a little bit of getting used to, right? Sort of the like deep interiority that we sometimes expect in like a modern kind of romance now.
Yeah.
We don't quite get the same amount of.
Yeah. I mean, it's there, but
of course.
It's
of course.
Yeah, it's almost more of an overview, like you're almost watching a film, Like, I mean, maybe that's not the same, but it's like you're observing the story than feeling like you're in it.
Well,
I
I
don't
mean,
know
I
if that
think,
makes sense.
listen, I would say this. I would say if you especially only read in first person, going to third is, people say, feels, awkward or weird to them. And now we're
Yeah.
like a little bit
Yeah.
even more distant.
Mhm.
I don't personally think that it is. I like see what you're saying, but what I would say is like there is no way Julie Garwood had any idea that anybody reading these books was like thinking, "Oh yes, I am like Jamie."
Oh,
Right? Like
no,
there,
I
and
wasn't
that
trying
I
to
think
imply
no,
that.
no,
I
I
wasn't trying to
know,
imply
but I
that.
think
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
people do really
Mm.
like, we talk a lot about like the self-insert reader.
Yeah, the self-insert's interesting. I
It
don't
is
know.
interesting,
Yeah.
and I'm just saying, like, there's no
Mhm.
expectation that that's what's happening. You are
Right.
reading about these two people who lived a
Right.
thousand years ago or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
so it isn't. I think that's part of like what that distance is
Yeah.
there, because there's
Yeah.
no sense that anybody is trying to. The author Garwood is not trying to get you to think like, well, yes, what would I do here? Right?
Right.
Or I'm like Jamie. No,
Right.
you're not. This is, you know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think, like, I do
Yeah.
think that you're
Mhm.
right. It feels that way. And that's because it's not trying to do
That's
something
right.
that modern romance readers
Right.
expect or demand, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, well, it's funny though, because I was trying to think, and maybe you have a better idea of this, of like when the transition into more kind of structured point of view shifts kind of started to happen, because I feel like that's, thinking about romance specifically, because
Hmm.
there's a couple mystery series that I read that are still they're well, one's finished now, but they're like current.
Hmm.
And they do this all the time. So I don't know if that's
When
like
did this happen in romance? Yeah, I would say, listen, I would say my guess is around the 2010 part of
Mhm.
it, right? I mean, I think like 50 Shades of Grey, my guess is
Oh,
probably had to do. I mean, and I'm saying
yeah.
this only like I'm trying to like I don't have like a real
Yeah.
hard and
No,
fast
yeah.
feeling, but like
No. I mean,
if
I
you
don't think
think
it didn't
about,
happen like this is when,
sure, of
but
course.
yeah.
But I mean, if you think about like Immortals After Dark, which is like what the whole first season of the podcast
Right.
was,
Right.
you would often get like lots of different points of view as you're advancing
Mhm.
like sort of lots of stories at the same time. But then you get sort of the like 50 shades of it all. And I can't even remember, is that single point of view? Is that only Anastasia?
I think it
I think that
might
might be. I'm
be.
not sure.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
it
right.
might
Because
be.
then there's like, isn't there a book that's like Christian's point of view? And so then you get
Yeah.
people sort of like really, and like I think often, listen, this is not a hard and fast, it always works rule, but
Right.
I would say, as late as, I think there's like transitional points, but like sometimes if you think about like a really big book, you
Mhm.
can either see that it is like reflecting a big change that has happened or causes the big change to happen
Right.
afterwards. And
Right.
I could easily think of books
Yeah.
in the early parts of the 2000s that still had like sort of some
Yeah.
head
Yeah,
hopping.
yeah, yeah.
But my guess is by like 2010, it had
Yeah.
sort of changed. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. I don't know. It's interesting, but yeah, I think because now, at least in romance, it's not, I'm not going to say it's never done, but it's just not the
No,
main
I mean,
thing.
people think it's
But
like a
like,
hallmark of bad writing. And I
I
would
know,
also
which I don't think
say,
is true.
listen, well, of course not, right? I
Yeah.
mean, here's
Yeah.
the thing I'd also say. I also think my intuitive feeling is it has to do with the rise of first person in
Yeah.
romance, right? Which,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because you can't head hop if you're in first
You
person.
can't.
I
No.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
welcome to the Three Faces of Eve, I guess. But I think
Yeah.
that that's the other thing that happened. So I think like there were kind of movements and shifts happening and
Yeah.
then boom, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I obviously this podcast is focused on historicals, and that's what I write. And I feel like we're still the main kind of romance genre, is still fiercely holding on to third.
And I love you for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause
But yeah.
I find first sometimes very tiring. Like, I'm just like, "Just tell me a story." I don't wanna be the
Mhm.
story. I'm just not actually that interested in that. And
Yeah.
so, I
Mhm.
find third very soothing, right?
Yeah.
I just find it, I'm just like, I wanna fall into
Mhm.
someone else's story.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I also think, I think that also has to do with, we haven't talked about this book at all yet. I think it's fine. I think that also has to do with, it is, I think, much easier to write in third and sort of have a modern viewpoint while be telling the story in the past. But I think if you're going to
Yeah.
write in first person and there's just things that you cannot do. I've tried reading a couple of books that are, in first person historicals, and I think it's really hard to get that like tone right. Like you can sort of have a narrative voice that sounds more modern, but can you have a character voice that sounds more modern? That's all. I
That's
think
a
the
really
cognitive
good
dissonance of
point.
that
Yeah.
is much harder for readers to get over,
Yeah,
is
that's
my
a
guess.
really good point because, yeah, it's different because, if I'm writing as this person that's going to have the viewpoints and attitudes of the time, it's harder to, yeah,
Now,
I can see
close
that.
third, obviously, is
Obviously,
like the illusion, right? That
right,
like the narrative voice is the character voice. I get
right,
it. But
right.
it's different. It just is, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't, yeah, but again, getting back to this book, sorry. This is what we do. We just go where the conversation takes us. But like, as you said, I kind of appreciated it in some ways because you get that other perspective on the characters from the side characters, right?
Right.
You get how other people are observing them and noticing things about them that they don't necessarily know about themselves. And I'm thinking here of Jamie and how she really, I don't know if mistreated is the right word, but she really, like, her father really kind of just relied on her to run the whole, took advantage of, I guess maybe is a better way of,
Yeah.
I don't know. And, so at the beginning, we get that perspective from Beak, from the stable master, who he's like, he can see this. And he's like,
Mm,
he treats you totally different from your other sisters. He works you to the bone, like,
right.
and so he sees this as an opportunity to match her with Alec and get her out of there and kind of give her a chance at like a
Yeah.
different
Right.
life. Whereas her father wasn't even going to present her as an option to Alec. It was going to be like, oh, here's my other daughter.
Here's my other daughters. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then Alec can see it when he finds out more about her and learns about kind of how she operated with her father, when he sees the way that she interacts with and protects her sister, who is one of her sisters is married to his friend
Mm-hmm.
in the kind of same way. So, in that way, it's like Jamie's not aware of this. And again, it's third. So, like, she doesn't necessarily need to be. Like,
Right.
we can still get that info. But seeing how these people make these observations kind of helps inform us as the reader of kind of the broader context. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's interesting. I think we're at a time too, like, this is a character who other people can see things about her that she can't see about herself.
Yeah.
This is very hard to communicate in first. It's not impossible,
Yeah.
right? Skilled
Right.
writers do it. But I think
Right.
this is also why we get sort of, kind of like in contemporary right now, at least, right? Like a lot of characters who are like kind of perfectly formed. How are you going to show a
Right.
character, right?
Yeah.
Learning who she is. And I
Mhm.
think like this is something that third really excels at, right? And
Mhm.
and especially in this way, we get this
Yeah.
these Alex viewpoint of her, right? But also
Yes.
like Beak and her sisters,
Yeah.
and also like a cultural difference,
Yes.
right? Once
Yeah.
she's in this new place too. So
Mhm.
I think it is really interesting
Mhm.
to see that evolve. Whereas like this is something I think that is really her, like, right, the thing about her father, she's like not, so in the book
Yeah.
the plot establishes this is not her real father. Her
Right.
mother
Mhm.
married him when she was pregnant, but he adopted her, and she does feel that he like loves her. And it's
Yes.
clear that he does and relies on her, but it also feels like, well, this is Jamie's way. Doing her duties is how she's
Mhm.
going to like earn her keep, like show her worth and
Yeah.
her value. So, like,
Yeah.
a really funny kind of ongoing thing is how furious she is at Alec that he won't give her duties.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that for sure. Like, it's interesting because, again, kind of going back to how this is pretty stereotypical, I would say, Alec is very much the portrait of, again, just not even having read a ton of these like Highland romances. Like, it just made sense to me, right? That he would be how he is portrayed, which is, kind of he's obviously head of the clan, this
Right.
is 1100, so this is very much still the strong clan system. This is
Yeah.
before a lot had changed there. And,
It is
you
hard as
know,
an American. I just want to say, like, head of the clan. I really had a moment there. I was like, not that clan, everybody.
not that clan. Sorry. Sorry. Yes. No.
His
No.
Highlander clan.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, he's the
C
laird.
clan. Yeah.
He's the
He's the
laird.
laird. There you go.
Sorry. I'll use that terminology from now on. We don't want to confuse there. Yeah, but he's the laird, and has kind of, now it feels kind of backwards, but it's not meant in a bad way, but very protective view of like her job is to just
Sure.
be the wife,
I
and
mean,
she doesn't need to do anything.
My job is to own her. She's property.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yes. And, in one sense, Jamie is the complete opposite of what he thinks he wants and needs, because she's so strong and independent and fierce, and she speaks her mind, and, and she tells him from the get-go, like, I'm just going to tell you things, and I'll talk back to you, and it's going to frustrate you. And he's like, okay, great. Like, I'll be frustrated, but like, I'll never actually be mad at you or anything. He's very kind of like reassuring to her. Where was I going with this? I did have a point. But so they get home, they get to Scotland, they get back to the clan, and he's very much like, yeah, just, relax, chill. You're my wife. You
Right.
have the place of honor because you're the laird's wife. And it's like, no, 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 no. I need to do something. I need to solve problems. I need to,
Right.
and in the end, he comes to recognize that her being kind of like a helper is actually a good thing. And, but it's like, she's actually what he needs, of course, because it's romance and it's what the other needs. But
Of course.
yeah, but she's just like, what do you mean I can't do anything? And there's a really funny kind of setup where he gives her permission to change things in
the
the kitchen.
kitchens. Yeah. Right.
And he thinks she's just going to like maybe change the menu, move around pots and pans, whatever, right? Like, who's in charge? I don't know. And she literally wants to physically move the kitchen building.
Right. Because it's in a different, like, the servants are having to like walk across the snowy courtyard with the food.
Right. So one of the servants tells her this.
Yeah.
And so he comes back from being away for, I don't remember. Well, she starts lots of fights. So he comes back from some expedition trying to calm things down, just because she doesn't know, again, the different cultural understandings here. But so she starts a kerfuffle, and he's off trying to appease it. And in the meantime, she's like, oh yeah, the laird gave me permission to change the kitchens. So he comes back and he's like, what is going on? Because there's like this wall down and there's like, it's so funny. It's great. But I love them together. They are perfect for each other. Obviously, they don't realize it, but they are. I thought that the way their first love scene when they come together after being married is very sweet. Like,
well, it's also, go ahead and talk about this, but then I want to talk about this as like a pacing thing, which is really interesting.
Yeah. I thought it's one of those things where she had asked him at some point, she's like, well, we just met and I know we're married, but like, I don't know you. Like, can we hold off a little bit on consummating this marriage? Like,
I mean, she doesn't even really know what she's asking for, right? By the way, either. Like, she has no idea. She just knows something's going to happen, right?
Yeah, she just knows. She doesn't, And he's like, okay, yeah, but he has no intention, right? But I think this is where I think you were saying it kind of differs maybe and feels a little more modern, where in his head, when we see through his perspective that he's like, yeah, we're not waiting. Like,
yeah, because he's like super into her, right?
He is, because she's beautiful, right? And you think she's gorgeous, and he's impressed with the way she's like stood up to some bandits and, whatever. And so he just kind of like pats her on the head, appeases her, but he's like, yeah. And so he just kind of starts kissing her, and things just kind of start moving along, and it feels good, and she's okay with it. And he just kind of keeps taking it further and further. And so in a way, it's like you could say that like he's very much pushing her boundaries, but it doesn't at all read as non-consensual, because she's like into it, which again goes back to that conversation about how we wrote these in the old school, when it's like the women are like, oh, no, 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 I can't want it, but I want it. And,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think like the part that's interesting to me too is, I mean, this is like what, 1100.
Yes.
There's not a sense from Jamie that she would ever really like say no either, right? Like there's like, I mean, it's, can you consent when you don't even realize that's like a right you have, right?
Because she is now his wife. She is
right. This
property.
is how it goes. And she's been raised
Yeah.
a certain way. Now, I'm not saying that this is like part of her mental journey. But I think like we as readers are to understand that this is, she understands that she's married now and this is what's going to happen. I think the thing that's interesting to me in terms of the book is that like pacing wise, this happens at the 33% mark. I made a point of looking at this.
Did you?
Well, just because I wanted to talk about this, because I think one of the things we're like sort of seeing now, there's sort of like a new wave of Puritanism happening in romance kind of across the board, is that now what we're getting is like, this is something that everybody is like waiting to do. And the delay is happening kind of, like I said, across the board, and it's happening more and more. If you read Romancing the Beat, which is like Gwen Hayes' book about sort of like the plotting of a romance novel, which is about 10 years old, she suggests that like a good time for this to happen is like the 50% mark. I now routinely, if I'm reading a book written now, I'm like, well, this isn't going to happen until 75%, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is, in some ways, to me, frustrating and kind of silly, because when you read this book, there is nothing, this is, the point of a romance isn't for the people to have sex. The point of a romance is for people to fall in love.
Yes.
Right. And so they don't have to necessarily have anything to do with each other. And one of the like sort of arguments that I'd like kind of like to make is that back in the day, in a lot of these books, in almost all of them, the heroine is, if it's male, female, right? And for a really long time, that's all romance was, right? Yeah. She's definitely a virgin. She's definitely a virgin. So one of the things you were kind of do is like get him, they're getting married, like she's not going to be a virgin for long. And then there was like, I think a long run of time when readers were kind of like, this is silly. Like people aren't virgins anymore. You know what I mean? Like this is like this, we don't need to like sort of like preserve this as a kind of way of thinking about like true love and romance or whatever else. And what happened to me in a lot of these books is, okay, you took that away then, fine. These are people with like a sexual past and a history. But then you preserved sort of this sense, though, even in a weird, stronger way, that however, the sex has to be like revolutionary, right? Yeah. And you're pushing it further and further back in the book as almost like a reward for saying I love you, as opposed to part of like the journey of figuring out like, is this person like right for me or not? Or it doesn't matter. Like, my feelings don't actually have to be driven by this. So I think that's the part that's like really interesting about it to me, is there's no sense. I mean, now you're just like, it's like you can see the authors like doing everything they can to like kind of slam the brakes on in like the dumbest, weirdest ways. Like how many times can the phone ring? How many times can the door knock, right? Just as they're starting to make out or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think like that's like a real object lesson in the fact that like you don't have to tie the like achievement of the HEA to the sex at all.
Right.
And I wish people would stop being so prescriptive about it. But it's also a really good example of like what we do say, which is like it should show the emotional journey, right? Like they're in the on this journey, and he's kind of like
in the forest,
right? And then like there's a whole thing when they get back about how like his bed had been sort of in a public place and she wants to move it to a private place. Right. And like the evolution of this is the evolution of their romance is being shown through these scenes. So, I think we really, and I don't, like I said, it's puritanical in a way now, I think because of politics. But I also think people just really like lost sense of it. Like this isn't, talking about spice all the time, whatever. Like that's not what the books are about. The books are about love. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And I think this is, I don't know, for me as an author, which is not what we're here to talk about today. So I'll be real quick about this. But like, this has always been personally my biggest like insecurity and hang up, because I don't write super spicy. Like they do it in my books because it's a natural evolution of relationship, right? Like it's a natural consequence of growing feelings. But I don't like linger on it a lot, and it's interesting because I think when I am conceiving my stories, I am thinking about the love story and what makes sense for that, not that I have to hit some spice target.
Right.
And so
that's how it should be, right?
Yeah,
that's
but
how
I
it should
feel
be.
like sometimes I don't know how to market my books, or I don't know where to place them, because like, like my last book that I just released, it ended up being kisses only because it just, with the timeline of the book, it didn't make sense to me for who those characters were. But then, like, you know, a book coming, spoilers, people, like, I've got my whole current series plotted, and a book that's coming, like, the first scene is going to open with sex.
Sure.
So, like, you know, it just kind of depends on the story to me.
Of course.
But then it's like, I don't know how to market my books to people in the current, because it's, I don't know if I would ever place my books under the title steamy, because then I think people are often disappointed. But then I can't market it as closed door, because that's not accurate. And it's like, why are we so hung up on these terms? Why is this all we're focusing on?
Right.
Enough of my side diatribe.
No,
but
I mean, I think that's a good question. And you know what? I mean, I guess I would say like my thing is like this is to me also like it's a real trap. Because the truth is, you can say steamy, and some people will be like, what are you talking about? And other people will be like, yes, it was. Wow. Right? So, you know, there's no accounting for that. Like, you can't actually, like, really. No. And I don't think we should, right? Like, it should be what's happening for the characters. And so, like, in this case, right, like, they are, like, you know, the thing that their romance is about, like, changing minds, right? Like, sort of it is about like him accepting her and seeing. I think one of the things that's like really like threaded through this book is, you know, he's like, I'm the Kincaid, I'm the leader, I'm the laird, right? And you shouldn't be questioning me or giving me orders. She's like, that's crazy. But like what she does is she like unites the clans essentially at the end, right? And the way she does this is not on purpose, but by just being like a good person, right? And having a set of skills that are highly valued at that time. The primary one being like a healer, right? I mean, all of the ways, it's no mistake. All right. So that like about halfway through the book, like they're married and kind of like, what's going to keep the book going? There's this sort of great line that's like, you know, she started 3 wars in the first week or whatever. But the thing is every single one of them was started by healing and helping people. Right? Every single one of them, right? So she heals one of his soldiers. She takes in a baby who is sick from his mother's milk. You know, she saves a little boy. You know, she protects her sister. And so all of the things she does are rooted in a sense of like what the clan is actually supposed to stand for, right? Which is togetherness and unity and community. And so like that's the part that's like really great about this book, right? Like
I loved it.
Alec is the one who's like, I'm the leader. And she's like, okay, but what if instead of warring with people, we actually just like sort of help them? And because of her, because again, this is 1100 or whatever, the fact that she can heal people is a huge, absolute, like, this is something that is desperately needed. You know, this is no, you know, Kaiser Permanente where you can roll into the doctor's office. And that I think is like the other part is like Alex has to realize like, wait, there's another way I can like conceive of like our role as Highlanders, right? As being community oriented.
I think one of my favorite moments in the book, which then leads to another moment later that's a little, anyway. But I think it also is it was super romantic, and it also showed the miscommunication with the follow-up, I guess. But they've just gotten married. She's married Alec. Her sister's married. I can't remember his friend's name, but
Daniel, I think.
Daniel, yes. He's part of another clan. And they're all traveling back, and they get set upon by some, you know, whatever, thieves, basically. And
I mean, they're going to steal these women and, you know.
Oh, they're going to, Oh, it's not good. It's not a good situation.
Right.
Yeah, there's some real danger here. This is not just... And Daniel kind of hangs back to help protect the women, and Alec goes out there to fight. And Jamie, I mean, and he eviscerates them. I mean,
yeah, of course.
Because he's the Kincaid. But he does this purely with himself, like just his body. And Jamie notices, like, he doesn't have a sword. And I might have just missed this as I was reading, so tell me. I don't think they ever actually explain why he doesn't have a sword with him.
I mean, I think, like, what's implied, because he has swords at home when she gets there, right? So what you're talking about is I mean, I read it as kind of two things. One is like he doesn't need a sword, right? Kick everybody's ass, right?
Obviously, he can handle everything himself,
right? But I also read it as, remember, they are traveling from London,
Yes.
And I also read it as he would not have been able to carry a sword, his
In
sword,
London.
into
Yeah.
London
Yeah.
without being viewed as a threat
Right. A threat.
by the
Yeah. Okay.
king or
That makes
whatever.
sense.
And
That makes sense.
so I sort
Yeah.
of read it as like kind of both of those things.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it didn't matter because
It
he's,
didn't matter.
you know,
But anyway,
Alec
she
Kincaid.
observes that he
Yeah.
doesn't have a sword. And she thinks that he just doesn't have one.
Right.
Like,
At all.
either he lost it along the way or he's too poor to have one. I don't know. But she interprets it as he like truly doesn't have one. And I can't remember exactly when or how. I read this like 2 weeks ago, people. Sorry, things don't stick in my brain. But she's grateful for something. She's thanking him for something. And so she says, I know what I'm going to do to like show you my gratitude, give you my thing. She's like, I'm going to get you a sword. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you don't have one. And he is so touched. And it's such a beautiful, like, he doesn't correct her to say, oh, I do have a sword. Like, I've got tons of, whatever.
Right.
But it's just, I just thought that was such a sweet moment of like showing her observation, her care, her whatever. And I think he was truly touched. But then again, I think it also shows just kind of the miscommunication between them a little bit and the different ways that they operate. Because then when they arrive back at his home and she sees all his sword, like his weapons, including swords, like up on the walls, she's pissed. Upset.
She's like,
really
how
upset.
dare you did that? You made a fool out of me, right?
Yeah. She's very much like, you just let me believe all this stuff and I made a fool of myself. And he's like, he's like, no, you didn't. Like, it was sweet, but like, I don't know. But I love that
Well,
moment.
and then this is like kind of the big spoiler alert time, right? Like then at the end, like what happens is there's like sort of some foreshadowing at the beginning, like a sense that like one of the things that Jamie's father has done is he's bad with money. He took the tax money for himself.
Yes.
And he has taken a loan from Baron Andrew or whatever, and into like so that Andrew can marry Jamie. And Jamie's like, "You sold me," and he's like, "No, my love, just a loan." Right?
No.
And Beak is like, "He sold you." And
like, honey.
but then she marries Alec and takes off, and like we kind of forget about it until he reappears at the end, sort of demanding,
Andrew shows up.
right?
Where's my
Demanding,
woman?
right?
Yeah.
That Jamie be turned over to him. And then it's like really, truly, like this is, again, like I don't want to spoil it. If you haven't read it, you should stop listening.
Everyone knows that my book episodes is spoilers. So.
It really is like one of the most memorable scenes in romance, right? Because essentially every Highlander in the Highlands goes to get her. All instead of like the whole thing about like I started wars, actually, she brought them all together.
Yeah.
So all of these people that she helped come with Alex, right?
Yeah.
Come with Alec. And then people who want her help in the future, right? And so what Alec does is he sort of like his sword is like of course encrusted with like jewels and stuff. And he has it with him and he like kind of pops out this like these jewels that are
like
priceless.
Big ruby or
or whatever.
Yeah.
And he kind of tosses it at Andrew and it's like, repayment for Lady Kincaid. And then all of the other chieftains do the same thing.
Yeah, it was really moving.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's it is a great scene, truly. And then, the best part is like, gonna get Andrew kind of like, and again, you couldn't do this in any other like kind of narrative point of view, except this head hopping one. He's like scrabbling around on the floor, like sort of gathering up his riches. And then he looks up and they're all just gone, right? Like they've just all like disappeared, like mist. And I think like that's the part about this moment is just like how thoroughly these are her people now, right? There's no part of her that belongs to England at all anymore. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
it's great.
It was really good.
Yeah. What an
kind
ending.
of the last thing I do want to touch on, and so another kind of structural / story element here is there's a couple, I don't remember how many moments, 4 or 5 throughout the book, where we get in the head of a villain character.
Oh, yeah.
So the prologue opens with kind of the funeral of Alec's first wife.
Mm-hmm.
And it is believed that she killed herself.
Right. And then that becomes that, as the rumor spread that Alec killed her, right?
Yes. So the myth that, Jamie hears, right, when it's known that this man's going to come and take one of her sisters, is that he's this man who killed his wife, right? And so there's kind of a little bit of this, I don't know if I'd call it a full-on mystery, but this thread throughout of like what happened to her. Because it doesn't necessarily make sense that she killed herself. Like, it kind of came out of nowhere.
Well, especially, like, everybody just thought, like, oh, she'd been hiding. And then it's Jamie who, like, finds her things and is kind of like, no, this is not a woman who killed herself. Like, she brought her, like, you know, she brought linens and baby clothes. Like, this is a woman who wanted to, like, sort of take care of, to be married to Alec, essentially, right?
And we find out, or Jamie finds out, that she'd been married previously and her husband had died, and she had a daughter with him. And so she was planning to bring her daughter out. And that was another, I guess that's a whole other storyline we didn't touch on. But I found it very sweet is that Jamie goes and retrieves this girl once she finds out about her and brings her back. And she just is like, tells Alec, like, you're her father now.
Yeah,
because like
we're her parents now.
You should have been, like, you married her mother, and like this was always the plan that she was going to come and whatever. He'd left her with relatives thinking she was cared for. It's a whole thing. But anyways, Jamie brings her back, and it's just seeing Alec with her is really sweet. But I'm a sucker for that, right?
Yeah, right.
But anyways, where I was going with all this is, so it's kind of what happened to her. But we find out immediately, again, in the prologue, because we switch into the point of view of this villain, that this person has killed her because they think that she was not meant to be with Alec, not Alec's true wife. And like I said, I don't know, it's like 4 or 5 times we switch into the point of view. It's not a ton.
Right. It escalates as the book goes on. I would say this to me is very common that from that time. And even still, like, you know, Nora Roberts does this all the time. Like we drift into like the sort of villain's point of view as they are kind of plotting and planning their dastardly deeds. Right.
For sure. Yeah. No, I've seen this before. This isn't unique. But I don't necessarily personally love how it was resolved.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because
this is the 1989
this is
of it
the
all,
1989 of it. Yes, very much so. And so we find out, again, spoiler, but we find out that it is Annie, who is a young woman who was, I'm totally blanking on his first wife's name, but his first wife's sister.
Or Helena.
Okay,
maybe.
Helena. Yeah, Helena's sister. And
she's developmentally disabled in a way we don't know, right? I mean, because they don't have language or
they don't have language or terms, but she's developmentally disabled. They talk about her kind of being a woman with a child's mind, basically, right? And so I didn't love that kind of the killer ended up being the developmentally disabled person. But what we find out is that she had been intended to be Alec's wife, but then as it became apparent that as she grew, that she was developmentally disabled, Alec was like, she's not.
Here's what I would say. Like, okay, I did a real quick reread of this. My read of this always that it was actually like Annie and Helena's family who decided, right? Like not that Alec was like, I'm not going to marry her, but just that they were like, this isn't appropriate.
This isn't appropriate.
This isn't appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Not realizing that, you know, Annie had also had, you know, sort of I don't know, like, like susceptible to like sort of some like misunderstanding from another character and, you know, like sort of, but I mean, sure. This
influenced by some other, characters. And so, I mean, I did appreciate that, like you said, it was kind of determined this would not be appropriate. And so hence after Helena's husband died, they had married Helena to Alec instead. But it's kind of this idea that Annie is like, oh no, I was the true bride. I have to like get these obstacles out of my way.
Right. And then he'll be mine. Right.
Yeah. And so I didn't love that. I didn't hate the concept. Like you said, I think I've read this in other books. It's not uncommon to have kind of this other point of view and kind of this sketchy, what's going to happen feeling. So I didn't mind that. But a part of me was almost a little bit, though, like I kind of forgot that was happening sometimes until we get another point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there was almost a part of me that wanted a little bit more. I'm like, if you're going to do it, let's lean into it a little.
You know, I think, but it's at the same time, it's not romantic suspense, right? Like this is not until what happens essentially to like kind of turn, I think maybe turn the corner in terms of it is this Annie. We don't know it's Annie yet, right? Like, but essentially, Jamie is out, like, and she gets trapped into a cottage that is then set on fire, and they know that someone did it to her on purpose because she's essentially been like locked in or barricaded in.
Yeah.
And this is probably 70% of the way through the book at that point, right? It's pretty far in that then the whole thing where it's kind of like, okay, wait, if someone tried to kill Jamie, then maybe it is true that someone
tried to kill Helena.
Someone did kill Helena. Yeah. And therefore this is now a real threat, right? But it's not a whole book threat at all.
It's not. You're right. No.
It is a third act. There's foreshadowing of it. Like, we as readers know what's going to happen, but like Jamie and Alec are completely unaware of the fact that someone is targeting her until it happens in a way that they can't ignore. So, I mean, I guess I would say, like, in terms of like the plotting, now, whether or not this is like satisfying to you totally, I get it's like a different question because, I think one of the things is like, but I would argue that, like, because of the foreshadowing of it, because we get those occasional points of view, we as readers know what's coming. It's just like the characters aren't aware.
No,
but this can be a really tough needle to thread because the thing that when things like this are done poorly, the way it feels is, well, this author didn't really have enough for a whole book, and therefore they invented a sort of like late stage crisis and late stage external crisis that's going to like push us through to like the end of the book till Alec realizes he's in love with her, and then the book can end. And I would just say, like, this is Kleypas always has a late stage external threat. Yeah. Right. This is kind of just how books were. Right.
You're right. I think in that context, I get it that was, you're right, that it wasn't for them. It was not a thing, and it's not romantic suspense. And so I get that. I think, like you said, it was just the way, maybe it's just because it did end up being Annie. That's
that it's like kind of yucky for sure. Of course.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like the thing that, it's like you might be like, okay, so structurally that's how it works, but like what's the emotional payoff? And I would and here's what I would argue, right? Like the one thing that these dudes are constantly like, if being part of a good husband is like taking care of your wife, then a threat to your wife, right? Literally to her person is going to activate something in him that, isn't going to be activated otherwise. Yeah. So I think like if you have these sort of like old school, like alpha heroes or whatever, right? It's like, well, what is going to scare the shit out of them enough to realize I'm in love with this woman? Yeah. And it is a threat to her person, right? Because that is the thing that they have been trained their entire lives, right? To do. So, I mean, I think in that sense, like, again, we don't maybe see it as much anymore, but there's a reason. There's a thematic, emotional reason why it happens in that way.
Absolutely. That I didn't question at all. Because like seeing
the
Alec,
Annie of it,
and all his protectiveness is of course what
the Annie of it is terrible, right? But I think it is also a product of, I'm not going to excuse it. I'm not saying that fact that it's from 1989 excuses it, but I'm saying like you used to see kind of this kind of thing all the time. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not an excuse, it's an understanding. Yeah, for sure. But well, I mean, I loved it. I'd like to read more Garwood. I think, like I said, there was just something very familiar and comforting about it. Yeah. That I just felt like I could just like fall into its little arms, and I knew it would be a good time. So
well, and it sounds like it was. So yay.
It was. Well, thank you so much, Jen,
of course,
for joining me today and for suggesting this book. And I mean, it's been quite a few years now, but I know you and Sarah did a deep dive on this book.
We did at some point. So
at some point. So I will find that episode and link it in our show notes so that you can find that too. I purposely did not re-listen to it because I just wanted to have this conversation, but now I kind of want to go see what you guys highlighted.
I didn't either, I don't think. Well, and it's funny because I would say the one thing I do really vividly remember is like I often only reread. I'm a scene rereader. So at that point it had been a long time since I'd reread it like from beginning to end. And I think like the pacing stuff is really probably what surprised us the most, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny too because I have heard your episode talking about this, but it was a
Sure.
while ago, so I don't remember any of the details. But it's funny because there's another, I don't even know if it is Garwood, but in my head, I thought this book was a different one you guys have talked about. That it might be a Garwood, it might be a McNaught, it might be, but like I thought it was the one where she's like a young girl promised to this guy, and then
That exists too, but that's like
yeah,
a different. Is that the Guardian maybe or the
I
Gift?
don't
Yeah,
remember, but like,
yeah,
and she like
right,
is in love with the image of him, and then as she's older, she goes to him, and
right, yeah.
they can be married. Anyway, that's what I thought this was gonna
Oh, and
be.
you're like, oh, this isn't totally different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so I started reading it. For some reason in my brain, I thought The Bride was
yeah,
like that concept anyways. But I'm glad it wasn't, and I do now wanna go re-listen to that episode because I think it would be fascinating having now read it. But
perfect.
mm,
Well,
anyway,
thanks for
again,
having me.
everyone, if you're not listening to Fated Mates as well, you should be. And Jen and Sarah also have started kind of a great community. They've got a Patreon and you can join a Discord, which I am terrible about that Discord because it's so overwhelming to
It's like
me.
drinking out of a fire hose. Yeah, it is.
There's just a lot of people, but it is fantastic if you want to find other people to, chat romance things
I
with.
think there's like a What's My Book channel, so maybe you should get in there and ask about that candy thing and see if somebody
There you
remembers.
go. There you go. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I just remember that scene. Like
Yeah,
I don't, but I have no idea what the book was.
we all have that book. We do.
Read it in high school, so 25 years ago at this point. So, anyways, again, thank you so much. Everyone go
Of
listen to
course.
Fated Mates, and Jenna's just fantastic, and she's helped so many authors like myself, and some of the books you love, she's had her hands in, and yeah, it's exciting times.
It is
Well,
exciting times.
all right. Well, I will see you guys again in a couple weeks, and just happy reading and happy listening. All right. Bye.
Thanks